Due to his father's absence and his family's economic difficulties, he was forced to work from a very young age to help his mother and siblings. At the age of 18, he started a small food trading company, and at the age of 24, he ventured into the nascent U.S. oil industry of the 1960s. 48 years later, he had become the richest person in the world and had built the largest business empire mankind has ever known. How did he do it? The protagonist of this story is John D. Rockefeller, who was born into a middle-class family of German immigrant descent on 1839 in Richmond, New York. John was the first of 6 children, born to Eliza and William Rockefeller. His mother was a very organized woman and took care of the housework, while his father, a salesman of miraculous elixirs that supposedly cured all kinds of diseases, was constantly moving from city to city swindling people, which is why he spent little time with the family. In the absence of his father, he began working at a very young age, selling candy and painted stones to children in the area where he lived, in order to help his mother with household expenses. He also tried his hand at raising turkeys and volunteering to do chores for his neighbors. Although it was a hard time in his life, these experiences helped him become very business savvy and very disciplined with money management. At the age of 14, John moved with his family to Cleveland, Ohio. There he entered a trade school, where he was able to learn about accounting and business, but dropped out at age 16 because his family's financial situation became difficult, and he had no choice but to seek employment through his trade school studies. He managed to get a job as an assistant and accountant for 50 cents a day at Hewitt & Turtle. In this job, he was able to develop great business skills. It is said that every night he would mentally review the day's financial operations, trying to figure out where he could have made a better profit. The company, like the money he earned, was not enough. He simultaneously offered his services in other companies to generate extra income. After 2 long years of strenuous work, he felt he deserved much more than what he was earning, so he went to his boss to ask for a raise, but he refused to give him one. Frustrated by what happened, he decided to quit his job to venture out and start a business of his own. He took out a loan and partnered with Maurice Clark, who was his classmate at Cleveland High School. Together they began marketing food products such as cereals, vegetables, and meat. The business prospered quickly. In the first year they made a profit of about $4,000 at the time. And in the second year, the sum tripled. Although his company was doing very well, Rockefeller wanted much more and was constantly looking for new business opportunities. In 1863, he saw his big break in a nascent industry, the oil industry. 4 years earlier, Edwin Drake had succeeded in extracting large quantities of oil for the first time from a well he had built in Pennsylvania. Until then, oil was not an unknown commodity, but its availability and use were very limited. So Drake's breakthrough represented the beginning of a new era in which oil would play a fundamental role in the development of mankind. In the following years, the oil fever took the United States by storm. Wells began to be drilled in search of the so-called black gold. However, this was an extremely inefficient industry, and it was there that Rockefeller found his opportunity. He quickly understood that the main business was not in extracting the oil, but in refining it into marketable products, such as kerosene, that could be used in stoves and lamps. Guided by his vision, he started an oil refinery in partnership with his friend Maurice Clark, chemist Samuel Andrews, and 2 of Clark's brothers. Thus the firm of Andrews, Clark and Company was born, while other refineries were under operating. Rockefeller applied his financial skills to optimize processes, hired his own pipefitters, and had his own wooden barrels built, and reduced waste to a minimum, significantly minimizing production costs and increasing business profits. In 1864, Rockefeller married Laura Spelman, a New York teacher to whom he was married until her death, and with whom he had 5 children: Elizabeth, Alice, Alta, Edith, and an only son, John Davison Rockefeller Jr., in 1800. 65 differences between the partners of Andrews and Company would lead them to auction the company. The auction was won by Rockefeller with a bid of $72,500. From that moment on, the firm changed its name to Rockefeller and Andrews Company. In 1867, railroad entrepreneur Cornelius Vanderbilt, one of the wealthiest people in America at the time, was interested in striking a deal with a Cleveland refinery, offering it a special price on the cost of shipping oil through the New York Central line in exchange for providing it with regular bulk freight to maximize its profits per trip. This was because the railroad bubble had caused too much track to be built and some trains could barely be profitable. So, transporting freight was an interesting alternative for companies in the industry. Vanderbilt began his search by trying to find a refiner with needs who was easy to handle. In his search, he came across young Rockefeller, whose refinery was growing, but still faced profitability problems. He thought he was the ideal person and invited him to his New York office. Excited, Rockefeller prepared for what he considered the opportunity of a lifetime. He got a train ticket and was ready to travel, but missed the train by a few minutes. He later learned that the train he was about to take derailed, killing most of the passengers. The businessman took this unfortunate episode as a divine sign, affirming that if he had not died that day, it was because he was in for great things.
A catastrophe is also a new opportunity, Rockefeller said.
Full of overwhelming confidence, he rescheduled his meeting with Vanderbilt and managed to convince him to close the deal with his refinery. This deal gave Rockefeller's company a tremendous boost, giving it a leg up on its competitors and positioning it as Cleveland's largest refinery. But despite the good results he was achieving, he felt the market potential was much greater.
He realized that kerosene had gained a bad reputation in some places due to fires and accidents caused by exploding fuel in homes.
To address the situation, he decided to create a brand that would give consumers confidence and help him continue to expand his business.
Thus, in 1870, the Standard Oil Company was born.
His purpose was to light every home in America with a safe kerosene of uniform quality and at a price affordable to the average citizen. He wanted his product to be the standard in the marketplace, the one preferred by customers.
This strategy was a complete success.
Within a few years, Standard Oil kerosene was already the best-selling kerosene in the country, cementing Rockefeller as one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the industry. However, he was not satisfied with being one of the most successful. He was going for much more, driven by his ambition. He set in motion an aggressive growth plan, based on acquiring or destroying his competitors. His goal was for Standard Oil Company to reach every corner of the country, handling not only the refining of oil, but also its production, distribution, and marketing. Little by little, the company began to expand its market by buying other small refineries. But its big break came in 1872.
At that time, the price of oil suffered a fall due to overproduction, causing producers and refiners to reduce their profits considerably.
Rockefeller, who had a broader perspective of the business than other businessmen in the sector, who only saw the inside of their businesses, took advantage of the crisis and his power to continue expanding. He struck a deal with Thomas Scott, who controlled the Pennsylvania Railroad, offering him freight in exchange for much lower transportation costs, just as he had done with Vanderbilt in previous years. This cost advantage put Rockefeller in a privileged position, and he would not hesitate to take advantage of it. According to the journalist and Arthur Bell, Rockefeller's greatest critic, the businessman made these controversial deals with the railroads to pressure his rivals out of the business, mentioning that they would face higher transportation costs, and making them the following proposal: "This scheme is foolproof. It means that we will totally control the oil business. There is no chance for an outsider, but we will give everyone a chance to get in. You are to deliver your dollar-friendly refinery and I will pay you in cash or Standard Oil Company stock, whichever you prefer for the value we give you. I advise you to take the stock. It will be for your own good." The vast majority accepted the deal.
Those who refused soon went bankrupt as a result of the pressure exerted by Feller.
Feller, who, it is said, resorted to price wars, extortion and bribery to gain total control of the market. This aggressive process of corporate takeover became known as the Cleveland Massacre and triggered a wave of protests against Standard Oil. Rockefeller's growing power began to worry Vanderbilt and Scott, who decided to form an alliance to face him together, agreed to modify the deal they had with him and raise the transportation prices of their oil. This alliance was taken by the oil magnate as a declaration of war,
a war he was not willing to lose.
Furious about what had happened, he challenged himself to stop depending on the railroad companies. He completely analyzed his production systems and found that perhaps he could start transporting oil through pipelines that would connect the wells directly to the refineries. Under this premise, he began construction of a pipeline system more than 6,500 kilometers long, extending through Ohio and Pennsylvania. Once the pipeline was completed, it not only put the railroads out of business, but also completely revolutionized the way oil was transported. Without Rockefeller's oil, the railroads entered a deep crisis that would cause massive layoffs, station closures, and the bankruptcy of hundreds of companies in the sector. The entire country faced one of the greatest recessions in its history. But while many struggled to survive, Rockefeller took advantage of the situation to continue growing his empire, buying up at very low prices the oil companies that went bankrupt as a collateral effect of the railroad crisis. By 1882, oil company controlled more than 80% of the oil business in the United States and began to expand to other nations. Its power was such that Rockefeller himself was worried about being accused of monopoly by the authorities, since by that time, the government was beginning to intervene in the regulation of free competition between companies. Faced with this prospect, he decided to create the Standard Oil Trust, a kind of holding company with which he would concentrate various investments in the world of oil and fuels. Under this business model, Rockefeller set himself even more ambitious challenge to completely control the global oil market. The businessman considered the sale of a single barrel of oil from his competitors in 1885 as a failure. The Standard Oil Trust companies were already present in dozens of countries, had more than 100,000 workers, and owned more than 20,000 oil wells. Rockefeller had built the largest business empire the world had ever known and had become the richest and most powerful person on the planet, which put him in the eye of the critics and the press as a despicable being who had made a fortune by annihilating the competition and exploiting his workers. The media began to fill with columns and cartoons that sought to portray the ruthless ambition with which Rockefeller and Standard Oil had crowned themselves as owners of the oil industry. On 1890, the U.S. federal government passed the Sherman Antitrust Act to prohibit the creation of monopolies in U.S. commerce, as well as to prevent companies from merging or conspiring to restrict competition. The act outlawed trusts as restrictive of international trade. The act affected Rockefeller's interests, but it was not going to stop him. The businessman responded by dissolving the Standard Oil Trust in 1892 and relying on his lawyers to keep his empire intact, taking advantage of loopholes in the law. While Rockefeller was defending himself against the state's attacks, another rival would emerge that was going to jeopardize his plans: electricity. Thomas Edison's invention of the electric light bulb in 1879 and the establishment of the first power plant in 1882 by the Edison Illuminatus Company had ushered in a new revolution. But at that time, access to electric power was very costly and limited, since it operated with inefficient direct current systems. Everything would change when a young inventor named Nikola Tesla succeeded in developing alternating current generators that allowed the transmission of electrical energy over longer distances and at a much lower cost than direct current. Soon Tesla's alternating current became the standard and began to spread throughout the world, causing the demand for kerosene to drop considerably. Rockefeller tried to use his influential power to discredit electricity, arguing that the new technology was dangerous and lethal. However, these efforts were unsuccessful. Realizing that he could not stop the electrical revolution, he decided to focus on developing petroleum derivatives. He realized that a byproduct of oil refining had been discarded for years: gasoline, a toxic, volatile, and highly flammable substance with no practical use. The entrepreneur hired a team of scientists to try to find a use for the gasoline. Initially, products such as synthetic beeswax and petroleum jelly were created. But Rockefeller believed the substance had greater potential. In 1886, German engineer Nicholas Otto patented the design of a 4-stroke internal combustion engine. This invention would be the basis for the development of other engine models that would be used in various fields. The operation of these engines required the use of a highly volatile fuel such as gasoline. As combustion engines began to be used in factories and automobiles, a large market for gasoline was created, and Rockefeller, owner of the largest world gasoline reserve, was ready to take advantage of the opportunity. In addition, the entrepreneur also diversified by investing in sectors such as natural gas production, managing not only to maintain his profits despite the fall in the demand for kerosene, but also increasing them to colossal levels. In 1904, Standard Oil controlled 91% of U.S. oil production and 85% of final sales. Most of its production was for export. However, under the scrutiny of society and the government, the company decided not to commit any more abuses or unfair practices against other companies in the sector, causing a considerable increase in competition that reduced its market share to 70% in 1906. Although many journalists and investigators, both public and private, exposed Rockefeller's monopolistic practices, the government found it very difficult to confront the powerful man. It took years of litigation just to bring him to court. Finally, on 1911, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that Standard Oil had violated the Sherman Antitrust Act in its race to dominate the oil market, and ordered the company to be divided. After this division process, 34 independent companies emerged, among which were the agency Standard Antigua Standard Oil Company of New Jersey, which later became Exxon Lazo Connie, former Standard Oil Company of New York, which years later became the Mobil Company, and the former Standard Oil Company of California, which would eventually change its name to Chevron. Rockefeller managed to keep a large percentage of the shares of all those companies that emerged, and his family kept most of the rest of the shares, so his fortune was not affected. Ironically, although the oil tycoon lost the court case after the dismantling of his company, the shares he owned were valued and raised his personal fortune to approximately $1.5 trillion, equivalent to over $800 billion today, which represented 1.6% of the U.S. economy at the time. To give you an idea of the magnitude of this figure, the richest person in the world right now is Elon Musk, with a personal fortune of over $200 billion. In fact, Rockefeller's fortune today would be greater than the sum of the fortunes of the 5 richest people in the world. After stepping down as chairman of his company in 1911, Rockefeller decided to devote himself entirely to philanthropic work and to enjoy his fortune with his family. God gave me my money. I've always considered it a religious duty to earn as much money as I honestly could and to use it for the good of my fellow man, according to the dictates of my conscience, said the businessman. In 1913, he created the Rockefeller Foundation with a personal donation of $100 million, equivalent to more than $50 billion today. For decades, this foundation has supported various social causes related to education and public health. During his lifetime, the businessman donated more than $500 million, equivalent to more than $250 billion today, making him the greatest philanthropist in history. John Rockefeller died on May 23, 1937, at the age of 97, in Ormond Beach, Florida, leaving a legacy that will transcend to this day. Today, many remember him for his ruthless side, but his contributions to the development of humanity were truly significant. Here are some of them. He directly influenced the reduction of the price of kerosene, making it affordable for the average citizen. Before Rockefeller, lighting was a luxury that only the wealthy could afford. He helped transform the U.S. economy at the end of the 19th century. He contributed to the optimization of the oil industry's production, making it one of the most important industries in the world. It boosted industrial development and modern transportation through the mass production of fuels for internal combustion engines. He was a reference for the development of modern management theories. He donated $80 million, equivalent to more than $35 billion today, to found the University of Chicago, which would become one of the most important universities in the United States. He contributed to the development of World Health through his foundation, which has financed important research and has led the fight against various diseases. Although this foundation has also been strongly criticized for its alleged participation in medical experiments that endangered the health of the participants. One such experiment was conducted by the U.S. government in 1940, which infected hundreds of Guatemalans with syphilis. The foundation defended itself by arguing that the organization had no knowledge of, designed, financed, or administered the experiment. After John Rockefeller's death, all kinds of conspiracy theories began to emerge about his life, his fortune, his legacy, and his family.
While it is true that throughout history the Rockefeller family has played an important social, business, and political role, their influence is far from that of John Rockefeller in his time. According to Forbes, the entire Rockefeller family currently has a combined fortune of approximately $11 billion, ranking 23rd among the richest families in the United States. Thus concludes the fascinating story of John D. Rockefeller, one of the most ambitious, wealthy, successful, powerful, and controversial businessmen mankind has ever known. A man whose vision to light up the homes of the world led him to revolutionize the oil industry and enabled him to build the largest business empire in modern history. In his own words, "I have never had the ambition to make a fortune. Mere money-making has never been my goal. My ambition has always been to build. If the only goal you have in life is to become rich, you will never achieve it." So, what do you think of him? Leave your opinion on the comments. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe to the channel to continue enjoying our videos.